Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We're grateful for this special Juneteenth event today honoring Dr. Margaret Burroughs and a new book titled Our Tuesday Girl, an Unfurling for Dr. Margaret T. Burroughs, published by Sojourners for Justice Press and Project NIA. For closed captioning, at the bottom of the screen, click Show Subtitles. Thank you to our closed captioners and ASL interpreters, Shirley, Juan, and Johnny. My name is Tahia Islam, and I'm with the People's Forum. We are a political education and cultural space in New York City for working class internationalist movement building. You can see our website, peoplesforum.org, for information on upcoming events and classes. We are now back and open to the public again, and we're grateful for that. So stop by Tuesdays to Saturdays, 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. We're based in New York City, but we also have tons of virtual programming, classes, things like that. And with that, I will pass it off to the incredible organizers of today's conversation, starting with Miriam.
Thank you so much, Tahia, for the welcome. I'm very excited to welcome everybody on this Juneteenth Eve. We're just so happy that you can join us for an event that I'm really incredibly excited about. I want to thank the People's Forum for their support to make this event possible. And I'll be sharing my screen, so I'm going to do that now. Yes, here we go. We're going to be talking this evening about Dr. Margaret Burroughs' work, her legacy, and her life. We're going to do it through an unfurling, which my comrade Skyla Hearn will explain in more depth after my remarks. Those of us who will speak to you initially this evening came together to make a zine or book. And we're all so proud of what was created. But the project is really so much more than the creation of a book. And we're going to share thoughts about this with you this evening. I'm joined this evening by Skyla Hearn, by Tempest Hazel, Sarah Ross, and Carl Williams. And the event is co-sponsored by the People's Forum, Project NIA, Southside Community Arts Center, Prison Neighborhood Arts and Education Program. Everyone who had a hand in making the book isn't speaking this evening, but they are present in our remarks. I am so grateful to all of the contributors, and I want to say a special thanks to Netta Bomani, who beautifully laid out and designed the book. Netta is so important to this project. So I'm kicking off by sharing a bit about the context for how this project came to be. I'll share some reflections about Dr. Burroughs and why she's so meaningful to me. And then I'll be passing it over to Skyla. I've been obsessed with Dr. Margaret T. Burroughs for decades. After I moved to Chicago in 1995, one of my first visits was to the DuSable Museum, which she co-founded in her living room in 1959. In 1997, I learned that she had been teaching in various prisons and jails across Illinois since the 1970s. In 1999, I had the good fortune to meet her at an arts event and to tell her how much she meant to me as an artist, teacher, and activist. For years, I've been threatening to make a zine about her life, but never got to it. Finally, in 2020, 10 years after she died at the age of 95, I reached out to my friend Sarah Ross. Sarah is an artist, an educator based in Chicago, She teaches at Stateville Prison, 35 miles away from Chicago, through an organization she co-founded called the Prison Neighborhood Arts Education Project. I asked Sarah if she would be interested in creating a publication focused in part on Dr. Burroughs' work inside prisons and jails. I knew that Sarah, like me, was interested in her legacy as an artist and educator. To my great excitement, Sarah agreed. Then she went to work, reaching out to Skyla Hearn, Tempest Hazel, Tara Betts, and other incredible artists, writers, archivists, and activists in Chicago to contribute their ideas and talents to making this publication a reality. People who know of Margaret Burroughs beyond Chicago may know her best as an artist or founder of the DuSable Museum. They may also know that she was a teacher, a writer, a poet, an institution builder, a criminal justice reformer, and a globetrotter as well. Perhaps fewer know Margaret Burroughs as a Black leftist. She never called herself radical, but said that others had used the word to describe her. Writer John Oliver Killens once called writer and activist Lorraine Hansberry a socialist with a Black nationalist perspective. It's a description that suits Margaret Burroughs too. She was all of those things, as well as anti-colonialist, internationalist, and anti-imperialist. So these are my words from the introduction to our Tuesday Girl, the book and zine we're going to be talking about today, the making of it, the reasons for it, the life and legacy of Margaret Burroughs. And what I want to do is kind of kick off the unfurling with some of my own collection. I've been collecting for a very long time in general, and some of the items in my collection focus on Dr. Burroughs and her work. And I'd like to share some of these items with you this evening as part of this unfurling that we're working towards together. This first item is a zine pamphlet titled, "What Should I Tell My Children? An Addenda." This particular zine that I have of hers, she published in 1975. And I'm just gonna read you the introduction of the zine for context so that you have a sense about kind of what she made and why she made it. Many people, if they know Dr. Burroughs' poetry and writing, know her poem, which is kind of famous worldwide, "What Shall I Tell My Children Who Are Black?" So here's her introduction. This zine that I have is a signed copy from her, dated 1976. I was only 5 years old then, so don't think I'm that old yet. So here's the intro. She reads, "The poem, What Shall I Tell My Children Who Are Black, was written in 1963 as a commemoration of the emancipation centennial of our people. Little did I realize when it was written that it would help to usher in the Black Pride era of the decade to follow. This poem has gone a long way since I first read it to a group of working class parents at the Doolittle School PTA meeting in observance of Negro History Week 1963. Interest in it soon became an avalanche. Requests came from all over the city and the country for copies. Countless requests came from publications all over the country asking permission to reprint it. As far as I can tell, It has been recited in programs in hundreds of school assemblies across the land. On quite a few occasions, I have heard it read over the radio. In 1971, while visiting the United States base in Asmara, Ethiopia, how surprised I was to hear it in a tape that had been made of a lecture on Black history to 2,000 men there. What shall I tell concluded the lecture. I have received letters about this poem from all over the country and many places outside the country where Black folk dwell. When I arrived in Jamaica in 1970 and visited Amy Jacques Garvey and Marcus Jr., I was thrilled to find What Shall I Tell had arrived before me and had been warmly received. After reading the poem, people of all ages and colors reacted to the title question by answering it in their own way. Therefore, a body of literature has been growing up related to this poem. Some of these pieces are shared with you in this addenda, followed by my updated answer to the question, what shall I tell all of my children? So I read that because I wanted to just share how wonderful it is to give you a sense of how well traveled she was, but also how her words traveled too. This next item that I'm sharing is a book that Dr. Burroughs first published as a first edition in 1956. The version that I have is a revised one published in 1969. She went across Chicago's South Side to gather children's rhymes, games, and chants. So here we have an example of Dr. Burroughs, the ethnographer, an archivist, a collector and preserver of Black stories, histories, and art. This next slide is a pamphlet from my collection that she made, I think in the 1970s, which is a series of poems she wrote about Africa. It was 1970 is when it was published. And if we had time, I would read you the introduction or foreword to this that was written by Dr. Burroughs' husband, Charles, because it gives you a sense of their relationship with each other, I think, which seemed to have been mutually supportive and also very rigorous in terms of art. And so, yeah, I thought it was an interesting piece, but we don't have time to get into it. So I'm going to move to the last slide that I have, which is of a pamphlet that she created in the mid-'80s that is a compilation of the poetry and writings of women in Cook County Jail, where she was offering poetry classes and workshops. And I want to end by just reading part of what she writes at the beginning of this pamphlet. It's under the title, How This Book Came About. It has come to be my feeling after being invited to make poetry presentations and lectures at several of our correctional institutions, that we out here in the free world, it's a quote unquote, are indeed our brothers and sisters keepers. The successful rehabilitation of many of the men and women who are incarcerated depends in large part on the interest that we in the quote unquote free world take in them. In other words, we can help them to take a giant step by showing them that we care. I have been trying to be my sisters and brothers' keeper by sharing my creative gifts with them. She goes on to explain in this opening kind of how she came to be invited to participate, that she was invited to present programs with a selected group of women at Cook County Jail, and also for men there, that she put out the word and 20 women responded to be part of a class that she would facilitate. And she ends this part, but she says, "This book of poems are the fruits of that class. Many of the women show great talent, and I hope that they will continue to write and create. If they do, they will find that creative self-expression in many of the arts can turn one's life around." So I just share these particular parts of my collection to illustrate various aspects of Dr. Burroughs's work that I greatly appreciate. My time's up and I could go on forever, but out of respect for the co-presenters and all of you, I'm going to end with this. Writer and healing justice practitioner Aurora Levins Morales has said, "We need to all have a stake in how we understand our past, to feel ownership of the project, to excavate our collective memories, and to share what we discover. How we understand our past shapes what we can imagine for our futures." This, I think, is something that Margaret Burroughs well understood. She radically shaped what we can imagine for our futures. So I sincerely hope that you all enjoy the beautiful publication that was created with so much care and love, and that it encourages you to learn more about this extraordinary woman. I'd now like to pass the floor to Skyla, and I will stop sharing my screen now. Yeah.
Thank you, Miriam. And thank you all for being here with us this evening. Again, my name is Skyla, and first I would just really like to give thanks and homage to our ancestors, starting with Dr. Burroughs, because if it were not for her, we would not be here in this space to celebrate her life. As well as our ancestors, all of them who came before us, who continues to breathe life into us so that we can continue to do this meaningful and amazing work. So thank you. For my contribution tonight, I will start my discussion on just, filling you all in on terminology, unfurling. So, what is an unfurling? And so what I would like to do as the archivist and librarian that I am is read for you from our text the definition that we provided for this particular project. And so as Miriam mentioned, and as you all will see, throughout our talk tonight, we'll have materials, to continuously share, as well as what's shared in the text itself. And so the definition that we provide for you, which is, so the special section of this booklet includes an unfurling. This is a social justice practice, or social practice, introduced to this project by myself, whereby people as liberated or liberatory memory workers pull materials from existing archives and share what those materials mean to them. In this iteration, we pulled from existing archives, gathered new materials, and also created new works to be entered into the archive of Dr. Burroughs. In this way, this collection iterates the impact of Dr. Burroughs and her politics of culture, care, freedom, and love for Black people. And so just a little bit of background about how I, came into the idea of using the concept, or the practice, really the practice of unfurlings, is some years ago, I was hired as an archivist and consultant with Never the Same, Rebecca Zorak and Daniel Tucker, to work with them to create like their archive. And so one of the ideas that they had was, you know, like, of course, we wanted people to use these archives, which is very non-traditional. In terms of, you know, just how archival spaces work. For those of you who know, a lot of the times, you know, historically archives have been behind walls, which are, you know, secured. And there used to be a joke about archivists being like the dragon by the door, but, you know, archivists such as myself and others, you know, who have similar practices, we are not those dragons. We believe in open access. We believe in people, you know, using archives. And so activating the archives. And, you know, like through that particular practice of, you know, the unfurlings, which really unfurling, so unfurl, right? To uncurl something, to expose it, to open it up. So, you know, you apply that thinking to archives. And so like prior to, you know, Rebecca and Daniel, as I understand it, Theaster Gates also had like, in theory, the idea of like unfurling. And so, you know, what happened with the work with Never the Same was just carrying, you know, the archival materials kind of throughout the city. So different people would apply their own meaning to these particular archival materials from this archival collection that these two had created, right? And so for this particular iteration of, iteration of this project, I thought, like, especially as, you know, Sarah, Tempest, and I were talking about all of these materials that everyone who we had talked to, including ourselves, because Miriam just shared for you what she has, you know, very quickly. I'll flash you just a few things that are here in my own possession, these little chapbooks, which are like very informative. And then I also have her autobiography. So, you know, but, you know, as the conversation went on, we all realized that, you know, we have these very valuable pieces within our own personal collections, and that they mean so much to us, as well as the other contributors to this zine. And, you know, we were talking about, well, how could folks have the space, right, to share their items in a way, and also talk about the meaning of those things. And I said, well, hey, let's just do an unfurling, right? We can do an unfurling in the book. And, you know, granted, as what had been done in the past, we're not walking around with like a blanket or, you know, archivally like sound supplies with archival materials in them. You know, we're not actually like, you know, in the process of working through that particular practice, but in the practice of, you know, creating this particular comprehensive like gift to the world about Dr. Burroughs, folks can, you know, bring the things that are most important to them and talk about why they have meaning, or the meaning of them within the book. So this is, you know, an iteration of the unfurling. So, you know, there you have it. Unfurlings, you know, for the most part, I love the word, but, you know, it's our way of, you know, providing a very meaningful show and tell of archival materials. And another way too of meeting people where they are, because as we know, within the archival practice, oftentimes people are intimidated by, you know, conducting research in archival repositories, you know, in some cases. And in this way, we're able to activate these materials by taking them out into the public. So in a sense, it's like, you know, we're taking the archives to the streets and, you know, making them more accessible and available to people, and allowing also for the use thereof. And you know, the projects were very successful. So, you know, that's just a little bit of background on unfurlings. And also it calls to mind an article that Ashley Farmer wrote about archiving while Black back in June of 2018. And, you know, she talked about, you know, Black folks' experiences while conducting like archival research, just, and, you know, how when it's just, just when we think in terms of, the spaces that, lend to our bodies and the spaces that do not, and, thinking about the implementation of like these radical practices where we're bringing in community, increasing, the ability to share information so that like research can be had and like exposure to these materials can be had by all, in going back to it, and Unfurling is a way in which, we're able to do that. But, again, just thinking about access and availability, and as I mentioned, Ashley Farmer wrote about that in her article, how like, these archival spaces were not created with our bodies in mind. So then, how do we, as, Black folks, as people of color, as people not of the hegemony, as I like to say, how do we bring these materials out and how do we provide access to them? And also, how do we attribute and share out the meaning of these materials to ourselves, as well as showing a connection, and, just really like filling in the gaps in terms of our own understandings of our own histories, as well as how our histories are connected to one another. And so, just moving into the project and like the meaning behind being a part of this project, it's just really, it's just something, right? Like how the world works, how the spirits work, how the ancestors work, because, I really feel that, they were working through Miriam, who then worked through Sarah to reach out, to me, to ask me to be a part of this project. And at first, I'm like, oh, Sarah, I don't know. We're living in COVID, but then also, just to share out with you all because, well, we're in an intimate room having tea and coffee and dinner together right now, right? I had recently been removed from my work at the DuSable Museum. I was the former chief archivist and special collections librarian at the DuSable. So, it was kind of a gift, very much so a gift, to be invited to be a part of this project. But then also, I was dealing with the kind of like disenchantedness about no longer working at the institution because it was so important to me being a legacy holder of Dr. Burroughs and being in a position to safeguard the archives there, just knowing everything that I know about her and caring so much and, in really placing a strong sense of importance on the upliftment of, her legacy. And somebody please call me at time because I didn't time myself. I didn't start. So I'm looking for fingers to stop me. Like your time is up, Skyla. But, so it was very important to me to be a part of this project. And so, for me, I thought like, well, how can I best show Dr. Burroughs justice, with my contribution here? And so I thought, maybe I could talk to people in what I would think her voice would be. Unfortunately, I never had the opportunity to meet Dr. Burroughs, but I've been quote unquote in conversation with her since 2013, I believe, when I first viewed her first video with the History Makers. Although, like I told Tempest, Sarah, and Miriam, my mother met her and received art, my cousins, but never myself, right? And like immediately when I was viewing that video, the tears just started to stream. Okay, thank you, David. And, but ever since that moment, I just really felt a strong sense of connection to her, the importance of uplifting her legacy. And, as our good friend Fahim Majid says, like providing contextual evidence, beyond what we understand of Dr. Burroughs through folklore. And I do think that this zine is directly an example of that. And so I will just leave it there and thank you all so much.
Thank you,
I'll pass the mic to Tempest. Sorry.
Yeah.
it's always so hard to go after Skyla. You know, both Skyla and Miriam. I just first want to thank all of you for being in this project, and Sarah for inviting me to be part of this project, and Miriam, of course, for instigating it. Today is Dr. Burroughs Day. This is actually a day that the state of Illinois declared as a day in honor of her, and intentionally the day before Juneteenth. So if you don't already know, make sure you mark your calendars every year and celebrate both the 18th and 19th of the month, because they go together in a very special way. And so when thinking about how to be in this space, one of the things that I thought, and Skyla actually convinced me after a quick last minute phone call to do this, but I wanted to start by actually bringing Dr. Burroughs into the room so you can have a sense of who we're talking about. So Tara Betts, who's one of the poets who contributed to the zine, off of a comment that Skyla made during a discussion, she went and did some digging and found this video that I will share. So Chicago is a roller skating city. So this is very much so in line with that, but just wanted to show this video so that you can see, even at 91. And people with the flexibility, by the way. So just wanted to start by kind of bringing her into the room in that way. And yeah, so.
Welcome into the Michael Walsh Show. I'm excited. Today we got a great show. It's going to have a little fireside chat today, talking about the stages of influence of your life. This is probably one of the most.
Sorry about that. So I do want to start by, can you see my slideshow now? Did it go back to that? Yeah, cool. And I'll put it in present mode so you might be able to read this. Okay. So, I've followed Dr. Burroughs' work for a very long time, and my interest in her work it really started several years after I met her. And one of the defining moments in kind of the, in the ways that I've come across her work in various archives was when I found a letter that she wrote to the Chicago Park District in order to.
Hey Tempest, sorry to interrupt. If you're showing slides at the moment, we're not seeing it. We're seeing.
Oh, you're not?
We're seeing a video called "What Will Your Legacy Be?"
Oh, okay. I wonder why. Let me check.
I'd recommend stopping share and then resharing the specific slides.
Okay, great. Let's see. Can you see it now?
We still see What Will Your Legacy Be, if that's what you're trying to show.
It's still on YouTube, not your actual slides.
Oh, it's not.
Someone suggests to reopen your Google Slides.
Okay. Sorry for the technical difficulties, y'all.
No problem.
How strange, because for some reason it's saying that it's showing.
There you go.
Showing now? Okay, cool.
We see it. If you click present, then we should be able to see a big screen.
So we're good?
Thank you. We're good to go.
Cool. All right.
So I came across this letter that she wrote to the Chicago Park District in order to, because as Miriam mentioned, the DuSable was started in her and her husband's living room. So they had outgrown that and were looking for a space to move into. So she ended up writing this beautiful letter that I came across in the archives of the Southside Community Arts Center. And then, you know, fast forward to a few years ago, while Skyla was the archivist at DuSable, she gave me access to the archives, and I started looking through a lot of Dr. Burroughs' papers then, and I came across more letters. And for me, it really spoke to my own interest in letters in kind of a different way, because as someone who is a curator, and my background is in art history, I've always had a little bit of a grievance with the ways that arts writing and art history kind of try to keep this quote unquote objective distance and a critical distance to work, and didn't really allow, I wasn't always seeing a space for intimacy. And so letters for me are really truly a site of intimacy when you're kind of like distilling something down to talking directly to one person. So I started formatting my writing, my arts writing in that way. And instead of writing to kind of faceless audiences about artwork, I would write letters about the work to the artists themselves directly, so that I could speak in a different way, take a different tone. So within that, I was also interested in the archival research that I would do when I would come across letters. That was just kind of an important piece of something that I would kind of hone in on. And so when Skyla gave me access to those archives, and I just came across hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of her letters, I started reading them. And I think as someone who has followed her work and watched her work, and really just looked into her various practices, the letters were kind of an in-between space that I really appreciated. It served as connective tissue in all of the things that I'd come across up until that point, and offered kind of like I won't say a different side, because the tone with which I'll show some of these letters, but you'll see that the tone that she used in these letters are just, it's exactly what she's known for. The language, the way that she speaks, it's exactly what you would expect of her. But I think also it shows the depth of the advocacy that she does and her commitment to education and to teaching Black history, and to really, really valuing Black history and culture. So I wanted to scroll through some of these letters and then read a little bit from the writing piece that I did for the zine. From what I've read, it's safe to say that her letters often served as both a hammer and a heart balm, bringing relentless urgency, tenderness, and unrelenting insistence that everyone do better and do right by Black people and all oppressed people with whatever position of power they held. These letters also exist alongside thousands of letters that Dr. Burroughs wrote to colleagues, to peers, to friends, to students, to pen pals, and to challengers throughout her lifetime, all of which live quietly nestled in the archives and collections that we know, and others that we know nothing about. Many of the writings clearly demonstrate the power of the messages she penned and illuminate the less visible work that happened in the spaces around and within her roles as a mother, as a wife, educator, painter, sculptor, printmaker, poet, author, institution builder, and abolitionist, as described by her students. Reading back through Dr. Burroughs' letters remind me that this form of communication warrants and makes way for an exceptional kind of intimacy, a type of consideration and care. It offers space for the hand and the heart to be discernible, whether the words on the page are sharp or soft. While we don't hear about it nearly as much as her art, her poetry or her institution building, Dr. Burroughs' letters are part of her care practice and speak to a tradition of letter writing being used to advocate for or connect to people who are far from us in thought, physical distance, or due to the isolating tactics of carceral systems. The last letter, which I'll go to, is from Dr. Burroughs, and it's written on March 4th, 1996 to Jim Chapman of the Prison Action Committee, and it expresses her willingness to meet and discuss the work that his organization was doing. And I'll go to that letter. It's the second one on the screen. This letter of reply bookends the collection with a closing sentence that is quintessentially Dr. Burroughs, and a statement that can be extended to so many communities that she dedicated her life to. Quote, "My mission from here on in is to do what I can to help the incarcerated, to make it, and in my words, to make it more whole and true. One could easily extend that statement by following the incarcerated with Black people, Black artists, Black cultural preservation, all the people fighting for liberation and self-determination, and us." And she signed countless letters with the closing, "Sincerely yours." And there's no question that she meant each word to the depth of their definition. So before I turn it over to Sarah, I wanted to, a piece of my own unfurling is this pamphlet that when I first met Dr. Burroughs at a gallery in the Bronzeville neighborhood of Chicago back in, I think it was 2007, you know, she introduced herself, I introduced myself, and she handed me this. And so as an effort and a way to kind of call her into the room, I do want to play, again, another video if we don't have technical difficulties again. Her reading this poem, just so that you can hear her voice.
Great. And Tempest, when you're sharing this video right now, just ask that you click share computer sound so that folks can hear it.
Oh, okay. And can you guide me to
when
where?
you click share screen and you're about to share the video, just make sure there's a little checkbox, share computer sound. Click that as well.
Oh, perfect. Let's see. Thank you. Okay. So can you see the video?
Yep, we see it.
Cool. All right. So I hope this starts from the beginning.
Do you know what the word legacy means? Well, if you don't know, let me tell you what the dictionary says it means. Legacy, property or money left to someone by a will, something handed down from those who've gone before. Now, in this poem, I'm not referring to material things like property or money. I'm referring to what you are doing, what each and every one of you in this room are doing with this life that God has given to you. What will your legacy be? What will your legacy be when you have finally cast off these mortal coils? When you have crossed the great divide? When you can no longer run life's race? When you no longer have a place? When you have at last completed the circle round and when an escape is no longer to be found? What will your legacy be? When you walk into the unknown all by yourself and alone with no friend to lead you or to hold your hand? What will your legacy be? When you must cross that great divide into an area from which none can hide. When you alone, with no one by your side, with no friend to lead you to hold your hand. What will your legacy be? What deeds will you have done in your lifetime which will be left for you to be remembered by? Will it be just a gray decaying tombstone standing alone in a cemetery? Or will it be as it should be, some act, some service, some deed that will ensure that you will be remembered on and into the eternity of life's game? So I ask you again, what will your legacy be? Will it be the fact that you helped somebody along the way during the time while you were here on earth? Will it be that you helped to improve conditions of life for those in your time and those coming after and those who are still here? Will it be similar to the legacies left to our generation by people like Harriet Tubman, Sojourners, Frederick Douglass, John Brown, Ida B. Wells, Barry Bethune, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and so many others who made of their lives a bridge for us to cross over on? and whose lives were an inspiration for us of today to make our lives bridges for future generations to cross over on. So I ask you, what will your legacy be?
So I'll stop it there and pass it to Sarah. And apologies if you can't hear that. I'm not sure why the sound didn't go through as well as it should have.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for being here on a Friday night with us, and for your interest in the work of Dr. Burroughs. And I feel like I'm always learning from the legacy that she left, and so it's just been a huge gift to work with everybody here, a huge treat to be asked by Miriam to put this project together and work with amazing people to make it happen. And I'm here with Carl Williams. You want to say hey, Carl?
Hi everybody, of course. Just real quick too, and let me say to Tempest, and just watching that video and hearing her voice, one of the things that I was just sitting here excited because of, I've heard that voice many a times. I've had that moment of sitting with her and hearing that voice, and it just reminded me, it just made me feel right there close to her, and her asking the question to a room of us young men at the time, what would our legacy be? And we all in there, just the wheels are turning. So I'll just stop right there.
Yeah. I was first introduced to the work of Dr. Burroughs through teaching at Stateville Prison, which, as Miriam mentioned, is about 30 minutes out, or 40 minutes outside of the city of Chicago. Having taught there and at some other prisons, I became interested in thinking about how she taught, because the way in which I learned about her was through all these students, and it was just really clear that she was, not a usual teacher, and she didn't. My imagination is that she didn't come in to the prison the way many people come into prisons now as educators, through this kind of lens of a specific framework of higher education. And so I'm going to start a little clip of the reading that or the text that I wrote by saying that I was trying to make a little bit of an argument in my text, because I'm just personally irritated by some of the conversation around higher education in prison right now. And I just went to her and her thinking about her as how she might have handled that differently. So let's see where I'll start. So I start in the middle here saying, prison is not a college campus, and I would argue it should not be called one. Students on free world college campuses, no matter their daily stresses of work, paying rent and tuition, or raising children, do not live in locked cages. Free world students do not eat each meal daily under a loaded gun, share a shower with dozens of other people, or parent their children in a tightly monitored visiting room. The prison, including the classroom in the prison, is born out of slavery. Some prisons are literally situated on former slave plantations. The prison is also born out of Jim Crow laws, truth in sentencing laws, 1994 Crime Bill Act, gang databases, stop and frisk, and many other policies that make the fact of a prison classroom a paradox. These profound differences don't make the people inside any less intellectual, creatively rigorous, nor their work less excellent. Instead, these facts mean that teaching in prison is necessarily has to be different. My commitment to students in prison is more like a family commitment, and the needs of my family are paramount. I learned through the work of Dr. Burroughs. Some of the first stories I heard about her were about her steadfast commitment to incarcerated people and the number of times she got kicked out of the prison and worked her way back in to teach. Teaching in prison with a critical attention to history and pedagogy, as Dr. Burroughs did, makes the educator, dare I say, an insurgent of sorts, always working to get over and around the mountain of restrictions, the dangerous tools of pencils, erasers, paints, books, articles, or tracing paper in a prison mean that the artist or educator must be persistent. We always walk the line of fostering a radical imaginary and getting kicked out for having an imaginary. The pedagogy of Dr. Margaret Burroughs is a critical model for practice that does not suggest the prison as a college campus at all, but rather a site of political refusal. The first time I visited artists at Stateville Prison in 2011, they immediately started educating me on the legacy of Dr. Burroughs. I've learned so much about her persistence and getting to and in the prison every Tuesday, and her radical care as an educator. What requires particular mention here is that many artists that Dr. Burroughs would have worked with, as I do now, have life or long sentences. When she was teaching in Stateville and Pontiac prisons, laws like truth in sentencing went into effect and overnight doubled the time people would spend in prison by 10, 20, or 30 years. Draconian measures allowed young people to be sentenced to death or life without parole, and new enhancements for gun charges or certain drugs added years onto people's sentences. So by the time I started teaching at Stateville Prison, I was told that most people would not leave the prison alive. Laws and policies made during the tough on crime era had turned their prison sentences to death by incarceration. To learn more about how Dr. Burroughs taught in prison under these conditions of despair, I would normally go straight back to the inside teachers, the artists and poets at Stateville who were Dr. Burroughs students. But because of COVID, and I'll kind of drift off now, that wasn't possible. So I turned to people who sometimes because of COVID and sometimes because actually laws have changed are now free people, thank God. So Carl is one of those people who had a life sentence and was able to leave the prison a free person, which is just a true gift. And I can only imagine what Dr. Burroughs would be thinking or saying now. So I turned to Carl and several other folks who were her students to learn how she taught. And so I just pick on it like two things that Carl said, and maybe we could be in conversation about that. So one thing that Carl said is, he said that the first, this is his interview, he says that he was in Cook County jail and that she said to him, there's no better time to be victorious than right now. Absolutely. Those types of things would just sit with me. Here was a lady that had this fire and I was like, who is this person? She had this energy about her that was kind, but for me, she was a revolutionary. She was a radical. So Carl, I just was wondering, maybe to go back to what Tempest said, it's like she was asking you all these really important questions about, the time to be victorious is right now. And that must have felt like crazy being in the dregs of Cook County prison. I just was wondering if you could talk about what that experience was and what that meant, like what you think she was really communicating.
It absolutely was, because I think that here was this lady who came into a space of a group of men who probably was definitely in despair, was struggling when it comes to their own identity and their own purpose and direction in life. So to have this lady come with this ball of energy and this excitement about you without even knowing you, and having this idea of what your life should look like and what it should be, and basically describing who you are, again, having not even truly even met you, that was a gift and goes in alignment when it comes to her teaching as well, because that was a part of her teaching style as well. So for me to be able to have that experience with her, I used to question her a lot and ask her 1,000 questions. She probably got tired of me. She says she didn't, but I beg to differ. So here was a woman, as I said, was of such great energy and a wealth of information, a kindness and great strength, and a resource, not to just myself, but others that was like me and who was going through different adversities in their life. So you spoke about teaching methods when it came to her. I wanted to share this quick story because it's always important. So one of the ways that she taught was, I one day told her that I wasn't a writer. So the idea was that we were sitting there writing poetry. And she says, hey, I'm giving you an opportunity to be able to write your poetry, which would be you a pouring out of your heart. It would be a letting in of people to see your pain, your mind, your strength, and just you. So one of the poems that I wrote, and I'll try to make this poem quick and give you just the gist of it, was called "The Fire Is Burning." So the poem went, "The fire is burning, deprived of justice. Whether you escape to better days, from the steel and concrete jungle, it's a hard pill to swallow. Life leaking and drifting, depictions of fiction, seen in high definition, chaos kicks into last gear shifting. The doctors of death got the world in knee deep. Our lives are written in blood from page to page. Like the songs of our ancestors, I can hear them coming. Deprived of justice, the fire is burning." So, in saying that to her, she says, "Well, who wrote it?" I said, "Well, I did." She says, "Well, you are a writer." So this was her style of teaching and her method of informing you that never say what you're not when you have the opportunity to be. So carry that. And those are the things that I took from her and that I carry with me today, to always be a person of great victory and be victorious in your life, through the toughest time, through whatever adversities that you may be faced with.
Yeah, I think that one thing that we also kind of wanted to talk about, maybe this can be a question and then a segue to a larger conversation, is about her persistence, especially working with people inside. One of my, I'll screen share for a hot second, to show one of my favorite objects from the
Yes.
archive is this editorial that she wrote in 1971, just right after the Attica uprisings, asking for support for incarcerated folks, for the work that she was doing. So it's clear, again, she also was on I learned this through Rebecca Zorak, so shout out to Rebecca for getting me to do some of this research in the first place. She was on the defense committee for an artist who was incarcerated, who in the 70s, the warden of Pontiac prison let the artist out on furlough to come to his own art exhibition for his own defense fund. And Margaret Burroughs helped coordinate that. You can see her on the right-hand side here. And then also too, she used her own work to raise money. This is in one of the back of her zines, to raise money to buy supplies for folks inside. So just that like persistence, and that, for 20, 30 years, always showing up, that in some ways, I think led people to call her their mother. So I asked a lot of the folks that I interviewed about that. And Carl, I'm just going to read what you said, and maybe you can say more. That you said she was a mother to us all. She had access to us in a way that our own mothers didn't, for the simplest things. It was times where it was just a guy who was very emotional about something, and to be able for her to give him a hug and say, "It's going to be okay," was powerful in and of itself when he needed his own mother. But also the nourishment when it comes to their mind, their heart, and what she offered is what allowed them to see her as their mother. Some folks said, I had my own mom, but I could see why people said that. But I definitely feel like that there's a thread out of so many and folks who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated artists who have talked about her as a mother. And I just was wondering what that meant for you all.
Well, in communicating that, let me be clear. I had my own mother as well, but my own mother didn't have access to me in a place like that, like she did. Is what is the point that was being made. This was a person who had access to you, to be able to be there for you in a time when you were struggling, and when you were struggling in that moment, and you needed that hug, and that hug added value. That hug was uplifting. That hug was a gift. It was a blessing. And for someone to say, "Hey, I love you, and this will be okay, and whatever it is that you're suffering, that you're enduring, this too will pass." And it would carry through. And to be strong, and to be rooted, and to stay rooted, and to stay grounded, and then pinch you on the cheek or whisper in your ear and say you're great, to bring a smile. Those are the things in which was very comforting to not just myself and others as well who was going through the adversities that I was going through as well.
Yeah. I also just want to say that hug in many cases was, illegal in prison, right?
Absolutely.
You're not allowed to do that. And also in another part of the interview, Cedric Cow, who couldn't be here tonight, said that he would hug her anyway. And he didn't care if it got him in trouble, but every week he would hug her when she came in. So, and just to think about the simple things that go this long way, but I think it went a long way also too, because she was so persistent for so long. Mm-hmm. So with that, I think it'd be great to open up and have a larger conversation. We had some burning questions that we talked about the other night together. See if everybody comes back.
And just real quick too, Sarah, could I also add that one of the things that also stands with us and that is always discussed is the conversation of, she would say, I didn't come here to judge you and to worry about what you've done. I want to know the person that you are today and who you are right now. That's what's important to me. And if you will be active in your growth, what will you become if you were released tomorrow? That goes in alignment with what is your legacy. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Those are the conversations that stand rich in our hearts and in our minds when we think about Dr. Burroughs. And that's why she was a mother to us all.
Thanks.
Great. So I think we're going to try to all be together now and kind of have the conversations we want to have and pick up the pieces that folks have in terms of burning questions or thoughts that you want to share. Does anyone want to kick us off with that? Tempest or Skyla? Any things you want to expand on or share?
Well, I don't have a burning question at this moment, but, just listening to everyone, and thank you, Carl, for sharing. Thank you so much because, just thank you for sharing, it's from your heart and I really appreciate it. I really do. And, it's these things, right? Because as Tempest was saying earlier this week, is how we're able to interpret information from the archives and then how we're able to present it. And it's always this much more beautiful additional layer when you know the person who is the creator of the archives, or, the person who created these experiences in these spaces, right? And it's kind of crazy when you think about it, but Dr. Burroughs was so fierce on so many different levels, and she was unapologetic, and people were scared of her, and she was 5'3" or something. I don't know. I know that, she wasn't, she was small in stature, but definitely not in life. And, just all the things that we've shared and will continue to share, past this space, will help people to really fully understand, who this person was. And I mean, even with having worked at the DuSable for 4.5 years, there were still things that I continued to learn and find out. And, just all of the years of what I thought I knew were pretty much I felt like it was comprehensive. Someone even called me a Dr. Burroughs expert. I'm no, I'm not that. But, we're continuously learning more and more about her. And just the one part that I didn't share in the beginning that I want folks to really understand too is where she came from. The cloth from which she was cut, her own people. And, coming from, St. Rose Parish in Louisiana, she came from, we all come from proud, good, great people, I feel, in their own regard, but like, you know, her family owned land, you know, and like, I mean, these things I, you know, tried to share in the zine, but, you know, she came from a particular place, which I think helped her to be like this very down to earth and rooted and like really like rounded, amazing person, where she was able to provide access to herself wherever she was, which is in Tempest's letters, and to talk to you, Carl, you know, and to touch your heart in that moment. And like, just for all of us to want to be able to pull something significant or what we find as significant from her to continue to live on, like, you know, as I said earlier, as a part of her legacy. So I just wanted to add that, but I don't have any burning questions, but I am eager for us to continue this conversation.
You know, I just want to go actually, Carl, back to your words that I just wrote down. Never say what you're not when you have the opportunity to be.
Mhm.
Like that's, I mean, I just love that. You know, and one of the things that we started talking about in preparation for this talk, and I think speaks to kind of my interest in archives, and particularly kind of like the work that archivists do to nurture archives and to try to add to them and identify, you know, blind spots and gaps and things like that. I do think about someone like herself who is such a big legacy. That impulse to want to try and collect it all. Now that she's not here to tell her story, even though her autobiography is a really great, a great point to start with. But I do think about, and I guess I'm curious to get everyone's thoughts on what just the precariousness of legacy, and even what Miriam said before about parts of her history that are less known. How do you wrestle with the idea of legacy when, one, you know that you'll never have the full story or view of someone, but then also, two, you know, really understanding that part of the beauty of a legacy, which is reflected in her work, is that it lives in the memories of people and their experiences. Like Carl, for instance, you know, it's like part of her legacy is your experience and your memory of her, but that's not always necessarily something that will land in the history books or even the archives. So I'm just curious. Maybe it's a question back to Skyla. Maybe it's a question to Miriam too, or maybe it's a question to how we understand our own legacies. Thank you so much, Tempest. That's such a huge question. I think about it all the time because I spend so much of my time trying to think about the legacies and lives of Black women who I've admired over many years. Many of those Black women did not leave kind of a record of themselves. They didn't write themselves into history in the same way that Dr. Burroughs has, you know, by writing an autobiography and kind of speaking to her own life and legacy that way, by a whole set of interviews we have that she's given over time. Her own kind of poetry and writing sheds light on her. She was so prolific. I think about her all the time as like somebody who was documenting her times, but also documenting herself all the time. Like we have a lot there, I think very differently than some other Black women of her same generation. And I've actually been interested to figure out like what made her do that. You know, in the legacy of somebody like Ida B. Wells Barnett, who noticed in her time that people were writing histories of lynching as a movement and completely ignoring her. That Carter G. Woodson would give speeches and talk about the lynching bills that were up in front of the federal government and not mention her at all. Like Ida B. Wells Barnett, not even being mentioned in the fight for ending lynching. And she just started writing her own autobiography at that point in time when she realized that she was going to be left completely out of the story and did not get to finish it before she dies. Her daughter posthumously completes it for her. but these are lessons for all of us. And I think because we have the letters that you beautifully shared in the book as well, we hear her voice in so many different ways. And then we also hear her voice through the institutions she helped to create, her visual art and sculptures. I just find like we're so lucky in Margaret Burroughs to actually have such a deep and independent in some way, that she did so much of the creation that you can try to interpret her through your own lens, but she also left you, like, she has the final say in so many ways about like, yeah, you can say this, but this is what I have to say about it. Like, I love that about her. And I think about that a lot with other Black women now, Black women leaders and people who are doing stuff in their communities and whatever. It's like, that's a lesson for all of us, that we should be in much more kind of proactive lean in mode about how we want to shape our own lives and also shape our legacies post our lives. So yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about that and how incomplete archives are, but how when you yourself are doing so much of the own documenting, like people have to contend with you in a totally different way. Like white men know this, and they've done this always throughout history. And the rest of us have to catch up. And I think that's really, really important to keep in mind. I see Carl's off mute. Carl, did you want to add some stuff here?
No, I was just thinking about something, just about her. And I was like, I don't want to just bombard the whole conversation.
No.
I'll let somebody else go, and then I'll come back.
Okay, cool. Skyla or Sarah? Sarah?
Well, I was just going to kind of add to what you were saying, Miriam, is that two things about sort of her archive. I know that when I started doing research on her many years ago, some of the images that I was showing before were back in like 2014. There wasn't a lot about her teaching in prison.
Right.
So that was such an interesting thing, as I was like, hang on, how can someone be doing this work for 30 years and really seeing like all these folks, artists and poets that I was working with in prison as like a kind of like living archive of her work, because they had so many stories to tell, but why weren't they documented? That was kind of upsetting. And I know that you had done some of that documenting work as well, Miriam. Yeah. But why wasn't it, like, I don't know, the Tribune wrote, some things here and there, but they were like not even interesting or critical stories, really. They weren't talking about her doing this work over the long haul. One of the images that you can, a series of images that you can find in the Defender archive, is that she puts out in the newspaper that you can take a class, an African-American history class. It's like the first African-American history class. It's in prisons in the like early 70s by mailing. They made a correspondence packet in order for that to happen. And so there's all this material, but it wasn't really, there's like bits and pieces, but like, in the early 2000s, when people are writing about her teaching in prison, they never bring in this like long history. It's like, oh, look at this older lady who does this like nice work. This is how it was framed. So that's one thing that I think I was thinking about with this work. But then collectively, I think we were also interested in all these artists. We ended up kind of just selecting a lot of artists for the Unfurling: poets, musicians, visual artists who makes work either about her or has been so influenced by her to make work. So I feel like that's another layer of an archive that can easily get missed. Is other people's work about her or influenced by her. But in Chicago, there's literally a Margaret Burroughs collective that organized a group of artists that organized that are in the chapbook. So yeah, just to sort of lift up the ways in which there's so much more work that we can all be doing to make sure that people like Dr. Burroughs really that things don't fall through the cracks. Things that don't otherwise don't get told don't fall through the cracks.
We'll have Skyla go, and then we'll go to Carl, and then we'll take questions. Please put your questions in the chat or Q&A.
Thank you, Miriam. I want to piggyback actually off of what you were just saying, which I agree is equally important in terms of us documenting ourselves and the work that we do as information professionals, as liberatory memory workers, archivists, librarians, artists, and as people who are making positive, as Black people who are making positive contributions to society, and in documenting that work, in publishing. So Carl, I encourage you, if you haven't, to publish your poems, even if, and I don't mean it like even if, but I mean like, it doesn't have to be like a scholarly journal, but like if you publish to medium.com, like any platform, but publish your work, share your work, have it out there. And, for me, in a lot of ways, being familiar with Dr. Burroughs and the fact that she started a lot of things. Tempest, gave us like an extensive list of, her background and, all of the things that, she encouraged and started, of course, with the Southside Community Arts Center and the different like groups across Chicago with artist salons, is just all of the things. And I was encouraged, in terms of wanting to publish myself, and to write myself into history as a Black woman, archivist, and as well as, being a part of and co-founding the Blackivist Collective. We're a collective of 6 Black archivists who are focused on, helping community preserve their legacy, personal and community archiving, because we know a lot of these stories of us, again, people not of the hegemony, Black and brown people, LGBTQIA+, we're not in the historical record in a way where it's reflective and being taught in history in classes. And we have to write ourselves into the record. And I know that, as a part of, working with Dr. Burroughs materials and listening to her really helped to strengthen my backbone and want me to, and encourage me to want to do this work and to put it out there and to encourage other people to do the same. Right. And so I just really wanted to piggyback off of that point. Like, we have to document, we have to publish, and we become a part of the historical record, and it strengthens our understanding, of each other in the society, because that is a huge part of what we lack right now. Right. And we can continue to have that conversation like another day, but it's just so important. So Carl, please continue to share with us, and so I just wanted to say that bit.
Well, definitely thank you for that, Skylar. I am truly looking forward to publish some of the poems as well. And just to add to what you said as well, um, um, when you use your voice, and I feel like you become a resource, not just for yourself, but for the community and for those that you come into contact with, and those who have ears to hear and to listen, and eyes to see, or however you want to describe it. So I just wanted to say that. But also, when it comes to Dr. Burroughs, one of the fun things, well, fun, yeah, fun. She would say, um, I'm not worried about people who don't care about my work, what they would say, or what they don't say, because I would keep doing the work. So this was her letting it be known that this work is a part of her. It's it's her life's mission. It's in her heart, and um, it gives her purpose and direction as well. And that is what she's passing on to us as well, and to those who she come into contact with every day by doing her work. So I just wanted to say that and just kind of leave it at that when it comes to Dr. Burroughs. But Skylar, I'm definitely going to take you up on what you said, and I wrote that down where you said I can go and publish it at.
I love it. Thank you so much, Carl. And thank you for bringing that into the room about Dr. Burroughs and how she saw her own work and what she considered to be the important things about that. Terrific. So we have a couple of questions in the chat, and I'm going to just ask them to the various people that are on here. Anybody can answer the ones that are open. And Skyla, we're going to start with you. There's a question here by Delson. Skyla, you said that you never had the opportunity to meet Dr. Burroughs. Understanding how influential she has been in your career, what would you have wanted to communicate with her if you had met her?
Just how grateful I am to be introduced to her, and how grateful I am, for how it is that she shared, all the many talents and things about herself with us, and in such a selfless way. I'm very grateful for that. Because, down to the fact that when she was alive, she opened her home, to people who had previously been incarcerated, and, let them stay with her rent free, and, and to other folks too in the community who needed a place to rest their heads. And, she's kind of funny too. And I mean, I've learned a lot of these things from her interviews and from her archives. So, trust and believe I'm not making anything up. But, she had a payphone in the vestibule or the front lobby area of her house, because she's like, you're not using my phone. Like, you can stay here, you can eat, drink the water, but, here's some dimes and you can make some phone calls, right? So, I mean, like, I'm grateful for all of that. And I probably, I'm long-winded and I try to be super fast and quick here in this conversation, but I will put it in my 30-second elevator pitch about how grateful I am that, just simply that, she is or was who she was, and that, I had the privilege to have been introduced to her. And I just want you all to know that Delson is my nephew, my little sweet, well, he's not little, sorry, Delson. But he's a teen, and he's still my sweet nephew who is watching us from Toronto. So I just had to share that. Hey, Deli, I love you.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Thank you for that wonderful question, Delson. So a couple of questions here. Thank you all for this beautiful night. Are there through lines across Dr. Burroughs' work? Something very evident from her children's books onto her poetry, etc. And then in addition, pertains to the vast scope of work. What may have been a particular attention to intergenerationality? So do you all see any sort of through line in the work that you've been able to notice and perceive in your, curatorial work, Tempest, or in Sarah, and how you've kind of engaged her work? Thoughts?
Well, I would just say quickly that that I feel like that she was an educator. I mean, so I feel like that there's a way in which even like, what will your legacy be, kind of asking that question to people kind of over and over again, in this kind of iterative practice. I think about that as like that education was a through line. But I think that another through line that like probably doesn't even need to be stated because it's so clear is that she loved Black people, and she wanted everybody to love, she like lifted that up so much in so many different and beautiful ways, both as an artist, as a curator, as an institution builder, and just, there's so many there's so many parts of the news archive where she is just really insistent that she wants to tell everybody that, the beauty of Blackness, the beauty of Black art, the beauty of Black poetry, etc. And so Black culture. And so I feel like that's just an obvious through line.
Absolutely.
I mean, I would agree with that. I think the education piece it can't be overstated. And, just thinking about it along the lines of not just like the actual fact that she was an educator and taught in high schools, taught in prisons, taught, actually made these settings for education and these curricula, but also thinking about the publications she created, the pamphlets she created and circulated, and made sure that it was in the hands of folks, to make sure that the printmaking work that she did was free and open to people, so that it could be hanging in the homes and on the walls everywhere all the time, to serve as a kind of visual education. I think that is very much so at the heart of a lot of the work that she did, and shows up in so many, in absolutely everything. So I would
Thank
agree.
you, Heather. Awesome. Carl, do you have anything you want to add?
And just adding as well, education, absolutely. It just listening to them just made me think about something where she would talk to us about education, and she would say how it's one of the windows to the world, and it's how you also travel.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. So real. So we're almost at the end of our time. I have two last things to put on the table and see what we can get to. Sarah has a question for me. So I don't know about that. I don't know if I'm going to ask it to myself, but this is the question. What political, you want to ask it, Sarah?
Sorry. No, we've talked about this a lot, but I just thought, Miriam, if you could share, what political lessons have you taken from Dr. Burroughs? Which she, had this really like multi-dimensional political life. And so I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I have so many political lessons, and this ties into my overarching question about her over time has been part of like, what can prison industrial complex abolitionists take from the work and life and legacy of Margaret Burroughs? And for me, some of those lessons include what you already raised up before, Sarah, which was persistence in showing up constantly all the time, but showing up for people who need you, showing up for the marginalized in real solidarity, and not getting pushed out of the spaces that are super repressive. Just keep coming back, keep coming back. It's been a lesson that stick-to-itiveness is a form of politic. And I try to hold on to that, like showing up for our folks behind bars, across the wall, and taking in and like really kind of like enjoying what you get back too. Like, we're getting lessons and getting taught by people. She wasn't just teaching, she was also getting taught and learning. And you could see that in her work. She was incorporating everything she was learning into that body of work. And so I take her curiosity as integral to organizing, her curiosity about people, about the world, about what was happening, and just staying in the know around things. Just, she's roller skating at 91, right? Like that tells you something about a person, and their kind of their commitments. I also think a lot about kind of like, we talk about socialism, and like what so much of it for her was a practice. The way that she shared her art with the world, the fact that she self-published so much of her work in order for it to just be disseminated, and did not wait for other people to give her a platform or, wait for them to open the door. She made her door and opened it and closed it, and was really clear on what that was for people and for herself. And I think about that all the time. It inspires me. It's part of why I've been a self-publisher since I was a teenager. Like, I don't think you have to wait to have people publish you. I was published by myself way before anybody took an article of mine and put it up anywhere, And I learned from people like Burroughs and others, Claudia Jones and others, about like, you make your way in the world as a Black person, Black woman, a Muslim Black woman, like all the things I am on the margins, I'm still going to be able to create for myself. And I've taken lessons about that. And that's also seeped into my politics, that you make the way by walking and you just do it and you keep doing it. And so those are things that really mean a lot to me about her legacy, life, and work that have informed me and inform my work. And I hope, I mean, you know, there's no way to do justice to like 95 years of living and fighting and struggling and building institutions, but I've learned, I've gained so much from her example. And so she's always been a touchstone of mine. And this is why this book matters so much, and the work we all did and that you all did in particular together to make it happen. I could not be more grateful. For the people who are interested and want a copy of the book, we have copies. And what we didn't talk about was that hundreds of copies of the book have already been mailed, thanks to Skyla, Tempest, and Sarah, inside to people incarcerated at Stateville and other places. Our goal with that is that her students should be able to read this and engage with it, even if they're not on the outside. And so that was my main goal in making it, was to share it with incarcerated people. If you know someone who's incarcerated you think might want the book, I'm gonna put in the chat a link. Yeah. So I'm going to put in the chat a link to where you can email to get a copy of the hard copy of the book. We've shared, sorry, I have to put it in the actual thing. You can see our hard copy being shown. It's gorgeous. We mentioned Netta Bomani at the beginning. Netta designed this gorgeous book. You will want it. And we are making some of those copies available to people. So if you want a copy, hard copy, and especially if you know somebody who's incarcerated who you want to send their information for the book to be shared with them, then please do that. You can email niapoetry@gmail.com and I will forward the information so that you can have your copy of the book, hard copy. We also linked to the issue, and what we'll do is also make the book downloadable there, so you can download a copy. After this, we'll make sure that that's available and it can be downloaded by anybody who uses issue. But those are ways to access this book, and like, please share it with other people. If tonight you heard about Dr. Burroughs and it's like some of it was new to you, like, be an evangelist for her work and her life and her legacy. Tell more people. It's really important in my life to make sure that we share this work that these Black women have done in this country and beyond for generations. Like, it should be known. So I'm excited for all of you to access this book, read the book, engage with the work, learn about Burroughs, go and do more reading, learn about her Black left work politics, and all the other things that she is as well. So want to thank everybody for being here today. Does anybody have anything last thing that you really want to share before we close it up?
I just will say that the title, Our Girl Tuesday, comes from something that Cedric Cow, one of the people that I interviewed and one of her students, said, is that she came every Tuesday. And so people said that she was their Tuesday girl. So just to make that connection to why we're sending all these books to folks in prison, and just a great gratitude to Miriam for that.
Yeah, no, gratitude to all of you all. Thank you for doing anything with me. Usually when people work with me, they either hate me or love me at the end. I hope you all don't hate me.
Love you. We love you.
We
Thank you,
appreciate
Miriam.
It's not one, there's no middling here. There's no middle ground. But anyway, I appreciate you again. Thank you so much to the People's Forum for all your behind the scenes work and your co-sponsorship. Thank you to the Southside Cultural Arts Center, which is celebrating 80 years in existence, like this month, I think. Very exciting. PNAP, you got to go and look at the work of PNAP and support that work, and all my folks at Project NIA. So thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank
Thanks
you
for being here with us.